Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're diving into something that feels a bit backwards in electrostatics, dielectrics. We usually spend all our time on conductors where charge zips around freely, but our source today, a real cornerstone text, flips that. It focuses on the materials that don't conduct, the insulators. So our mission really is to figure out this puzzle. How can you stick something like glass or maybe oil, a non-conductor, between charged plates and have it change the actual physics? It feels wrong, doesn't it? We're going to try and distill the key ideas, from the experimental shocker down to the equations Feynman used to sort it all out.
It really is a fascinating paradox. The gut feeling is insulator should just be like empty space, like a vacuum doing nothing. But, as we'll dig into, putting an insulator in there actually changes the whole electric field setup. And the main idea we need to grapple with is this thing called the dielectric constant, kappa. Hopefully, by the end of this, you'll get how the material responds inside, and importantly, how that response makes the math of electrostatics, well, simpler in some ways.
Okay, let's start at the beginning then. The lab bench. The actual observation that got this whole field rolling. We all kind of remember the basic capacitor, right? Parallel plates in a vacuum. The capacitance, $60 a day, depends on the plate area, the distance, and that constant epsilon dollars. Simple enough.
Right. And then comes Faraday's big discovery. You take that same capacitor, but now you fill the gap between the plates with some insulating material, could be anything, plastic, paper, whatever, a dielectric. And what you find every single time is the capacitance dollars goes up. Not down, not stays the same, always increases. And it increases by a very specific factor that just depends on what material you use.
Okay, hang on. If the capacitance goes up, that tells you something fundamental about the field inside, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Just think about the definition, CQ VA dollars. Let's say you charge up the plates, get a fixed amount of charge coulers on them, then you slide your dielectric material in. Dollars goes up. But Taylor hasn't changed. For that equation to still work, the voltage value between the plates has to drop.
Oh.
And since voltage is just the integral of the electric field, if the voltage drops over the same distance, it means the electric field strength, E dol, inside that dielectric material must be lower than it was when it was just vacuum.
So the material itself is somehow fighting back against the external field.
That's the core phenomenon we need to explain. How does an insulator manage to reduce the field?
Right. It's not conducting charge away. So what's happening at the micro level, inside the atoms?
Well, since the charges can't just flow like in a metal, the action has to be within the atoms or molecules themselves. When you apply that external electric field, it pushes on the positive nucleus and pulls on the negative electron cloud. They shift just a tiny bit relative to each other.
So they're not ripping apart, just sort of stretching.
Exactly, stretching or maybe reorienting if they were already polar molecules. This little separation of charge within the atom creates what we call an induced dipole moment. Suddenly, all these atoms are acting like tiny little compass needles, even if they weren't inherently magnetic or polar before. They get aligned by the external field.
Okay, so the whole material becomes polarized.
Precisely. And that leads us to the main mathematical tool we need. The polarization vector, usually written as SUMBR, is the crucial concept here. It's defined as the total electric dipole moment per unit volume in the material. It's a macroscopic average, telling us how much alignment we have overall and in which direction.
And here's the bit that makes it workable, I guess. For a lot of common materials, this polarization valence is just directly proportional to the electric field that's causing it.
Yeah.
A linear relationship.
Yes, exactly. For many materials, what we call linear dielectrics, Tybal just scales directly with ES. Piolicki is another property called susceptibility. This linearity is, well, it's what makes the theory relatively straightforward.
I have to ask, though, this picture of tiny dipoles lining up, is it like a perfect alignment? Or is there a limit? Can you saturate the material?
That's a really good physical question. In the basic theory, especially the kind Feynman lays out here, we often treat it as perfectly linear. It just keeps increasing with energy. But you're right. In reality, especially with very, very strong electric fields, you can start to saturate the material. You can only stretch or align the molecules so much.
Right.
But for, typical fields and capacitors in everyday situations, the linear approximation works incredibly well. The individual alignment might be small, but there are just so many atoms that the overall effect, pi dollars, is significant.
Okay, so we have $10, this measure of internal alignment. But how does that connect back to the macroscopic observation? How do these tiny internal dipoles actually reduce the overall field we measure?
It happens through something called polarization charges. Think about it. Imagine all those little dipoles lined up neatly, head to tail, throughout the material.
Okay.
Deep inside the bulk of the material, the positive end of one dipole is right next to the negative end of the next one. They cancel each other out charge-wise.
Ah, I see. Like magnets stacked end to end.
Kind of, yeah. But what happens right at the surface? At one surface, you'll have a layer of exposed positive ends with no negative ends next to them to cancel. And at the other surface, you'll have a layer of exposed negative ends. These uncanceled charges at the boundaries are the polarization surface charges, often written as sigma-tex pole. And it turns out mathematically, this surface charge density is exactly equal to the component of the polarization vector, beta dollars, that's sticking straight out of the surface.
So these surface charges, created by the alignment, set up their own electric field.
Which points in the opposite direction to the original external field. And that's what causes the reduction in the total electric field of dollars inside the dielectric.
That makes sense for a nice uniform block. But what if the polarization dollars isn't the same everywhere? Maybe the field isn't uniform or the material isn't homogeneous.
Right, good point. That's the next level of complexity. If Gala changes from point to point inside the material, then that internal cancellation we talked about isn't perfect anymore. If the alignment gets stronger as you move through the material, for instance, you end up with a net buildup of charge within the volume itself, not just on the surfaces. This is the volume polarization charge density. And mathematically, this volume charge density is related to how rapidly it's changing specifically. It's equal to the negative divergence of Pala, so a nabla Pala.
Okay, wow. So now things are getting complicated. We started with the charges we put on the capacitor plates, the free charges. Let's call their density digress free. But now the material itself generates these polarization charges, both on the surface and potentially inside, if we want to use something fundamental like Gauss's law.
You'd have to include all the charges, Pell-Matex free, plus Pell-Matex. And calculating Gauss's dipole is, frankly, a nightmare because it depends on the detailed atomic response everywhere.
Yeah, that sounds awful.
It really highlights the challenge. Trying to work directly with both free and polarization charges is just too messy for most practical problems. And this is where physics pulls out a clever trick, a mathematical rearrangement. We introduce a new vector field. It's called the electric displacement field, or just dollars.
Okay. Why?
The whole point of defining dollars is to help us sort of mathematically sidestep the polarization charges. We define it like this: dollars epsilon E plus peta.
Dollars epsilon E plus pk. Okay, so how does that help?
Well, remember, Gauss's law in its original form relates the divergence of dollars to the total charge density divided by epsilon E. That's nabla E plus epsilon E.
Right.
Now substitute Gauss's law for nabla D. You get nabla D plus nabla D plus nabla plus ta. And remember, we just said collidate pilibata E. And remember, we just said cancel. Exactly. The tom-tom cancels with the nabla T term. And you're left with something incredibly elegant, nabla D free.
Wow. Okay. So Gauss's law, written for dollars, only depends on the charges we put there, the free charges. It lets us ignore the complicated polarization charges that the material creates internally.
That's the power of it. The material's response is still hidden in there, inside dollars, which is part of d-dollars definition. But when you use the divergence form, d-rho-dollar lets you calculate fields based only on the free charges you control. It's a massive simplification for problem solving.
It feels like a mathematical sleight of hand, though.
Yeah.
If we're using dollars and it explicitly ignores the polarization charges, does that mean we can't use dollars to calculate the force on those polarization charges? Are we losing something physical by using the shortcut?
That's a very sharp question. And you're absolutely right to be cautious. Dielectrics is primarily a calculation tool specifically for making Gauss's law simpler. The actual physical force on any charge, whether it's free or a polarization charge, is always given by the true electric field E. So half I phi Eli. Always. The brilliance of dollars is that it gives us an easier way to find Eli, using only two regalarsals. Once you've used dollars and the material properties to figure out E-do, you then use that E to calculate any forces. So $dollar helps find ELA, $80 gives the force. You don't lose the physics, you just simplify the calculation path.
Okay, that makes sense. It's a tool to find the real field ELA. And if we stick with those simple linear materials we mentioned.
Yes. If PLA is proportional to EO, say PLO epsilon E plus EO, then our definition, $dollar epsilon E plus P digos dollar E plus epsilon G, well, we can factor that out. DLO is epsilon DLR 1 plus G.
Right.
And this whole term epsilon DLR 1 plus G is just another material property. We call it the permittivity of the material epsilon. So for linear dielectrics, we get a very simple relationship. $dollar epsilon E.
So dollars is just proportional to the dollars in these cases.
Exactly. And remember that factor, the susceptibility. It tells you how easily the material polarizes.
Okay, wait. So topic is about how easily it polarizes microscopically. And kappa, the dielectric constant, was the macroscopic factor the capacitance increased by. Are they just two ways of saying the same thing?
They are very closely related. Remember, kappa was defined by how much dollars increased, which also relates to how much other decreased for a given QR. Since Taylor epsilon E and epsilon epsilon 1 plus g, we can see the connection. It turns out that the dielectric constant kappa is simply the ratio of the material's permittivity epsilon to the vacuum permittivity epsilon. So kappa epsilon epsilon, which means kappa epsilon 1 plus g epsilon 1 plus g.
Okay, so if you know how susceptible the material is, you immediately know its dielectric constant, and vice versa. They're locked together. Kappa 1 plus chi. Got it.
Precisely. They quantify the same underlying physical property of the material's response.
Okay, so we have this nice framework now. Dator dollars simplifies Gauss's law, using only free charges. For simple materials, Dator dollars epsilon E, and epsilon E is related to kappa. How did this all loop back to actual forces between, say, charged objects when there's dielectric present?
Well, the most direct consequence is that the force is reduced. If the electric field dollars inside the dielectric is reduced by a factor related to kappa compared to vacuum, then the force between charges embedded in that dielectric or between conductors separated by it will also be reduced. Roughly speaking, the force goes down by a factor of $1 cap compared to the force in vacuum.
But calculating that force directly by summing up forces on all the free and polarization charges, that still sounds like the nightmare scenario you mentioned earlier.
It is, and that's why for calculating forces on dielectric objects themselves, physicists often turn to a different, more powerful approach, the energy method.
Using energy, why is that better?
Because it lets you bypass the messy details of exactly where all the polarization charges are and what the internal stresses in the material are doing. Instead, you just look at the total electrical energy stored in the system. The fundamental idea is that systems tend to move towards states of lower potential energy. Force is related to the rate of change of potential energy with position. $1 equates dCOdXd.
Okay.
So imagine that slab of dielectric material being pulled into a capacitor, like in Feynman's example. Let's say the capacitor plates are held at a constant voltage by a battery. The stored energy in a capacitor is $1, Vol.2, CV22. As the slab slides further in, it fills more of the space, and we know the capacitance dollar increases because of the dielectric.
So dollars goes up.
Since $1 is constant, if $1 goes up, the stored energy actually decreases. Wait, no, that's for constant charge. If $1 is constant, $1 Frat12 CV2, so as $1 increases, the energy dollar stored increases. But the battery has to do work to put more charge on the plates to keep $5 constant. The total energy change, including the battery's work, leads to a net force pulling the slab in.
Huh. Okay. The system, including the battery, wants to reach a configuration that involves pulling the dielectric in.
Yes, the system acts to increase the capacitance. Calculating the force then just becomes a matter of figuring out how much the capacitance dollar changes as the slab moves a small distance, and relating that change to the capacitance force. The energy method gives you fixed dollars, Frac 2 V.
That's much cleaner. You just need to know how capacitance changes with position, not the microscopic details of PV utility.
Exactly. It's a very powerful conceptual shortcut. So we've gone from the basic experiment capacitance increases, kappa, to the microscopic picture of atoms polarizing, which led us to define this useful dollar field to simplify Gauss's law using only free charges. And finally, we use the energy principle to calculate forces on dielectrics without getting bogged down in the microscopic details.
It's really quite elegant when you see the whole path. All that complex internal physics, the quantum stuff happening inside the atoms, it all gets bundled up into one or maybe two measurable macroscopic numbers, kappa or kappa.
That's the beauty of it for many applications. We measure data's kappa doll, define Taylor dollars, and we can solve electrostatic problems in the presence of these materials without needing a full microscopic simulation.
So even though they don't conduct, these insulators are far from passive. They actively reshape the electric fields around them. We hope this deep dive gave you a clearer picture, maybe a shortcut, to understanding how dielectrics work and how they fit into the bigger story of electrostatics. Thanks for joining us for this exploration.